Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, welcome. I am Mike, owner of Bristlink Miniatures, and today I'm going ahead and building and painting a model called Aloy. Her name is Aloy from the video game Horizon Zero Dawn, which was actually just remastered recently with updated graphics. Went ahead and printed her on my Elegoo Saturn 4 printer, and went ahead and used Chaos Black Citadel primer paint, and here I'm just using a white, I think it's a white ink I'm using to go ahead and do that zenithal highlight, pretty angled where the sun was really going to come down and hit her most exposed features, and making sure that they're illuminated properly. Yeah, this character, her name is Aloy, from the, like I said, from the game Horizon Zero Dawn. It came out a few years ago, but just recently they introduced a graphics update, and I've been playing it and actually having quite a bit of fun. The story's interesting, gameplay is cool, and I thought I would just go ahead and do a model of Aloy. I choose this particular color as an undercolor for the skin because I feel it helps brighten up the overall skin tone, gives it just that kind of that extra glowy color that her skin would have at the end. It just helps boost the other colors that are going to be put on top here. Starting with using the sunset red to go over the skin. I'm not really worrying about where the zenithal is falling or not, because this is just going on and pretty thin, and it's going to show both the highlights and the shadowed areas as it dries. I use a Badger Patriot 105 airbrush for the majority of the work that you see in these videos. I do have a smaller needle Iwata as well. That actually gives me more problems than I find it useful with the clogging and that. So this is really my go-to, the Badger, like I said, this Badger airbrush. It's just been a super good workhorse for me. And here I'm just finishing up the last of the skin pieces on the model. Now I'm moving on to a red ink. This particular red ink I watered down, probably about 50-50 water and ink. And here I'm just punching this into the shadow areas, the areas where the skin has folds and creases, and kind of pushing that darker, those roughly where the darker areas are, as well as, like I said, where kind of like skin would have more interest rather than just on the flat areas. Like I said, folds, skins, muscle creases, and that sort of thing. Like I said, this is a pretty watered down ink, and just going ahead and going lightly with the airbrush, sometimes multiple coats depending on how really deep the recesses are in the model. Moving on to using I believe it's Kinslov Flesh color from P3, and this is a tone that's a little darker than I would normally go next. I'm using this tone to give it that more of that sun-kissed outdoor suntan tone, at least base tone. We'll definitely go and lighten this up here in the next few steps, but this sets a deeper tone than some of the other models that I have done. Regarding the P3 paints, so I apologize if some of these paints aren't available anymore. I truly do not know. I know my local game store has discontinued all Privateer Press products at least a couple of years ago, so I have no idea if they're even making these paints anymore. They're just paints that I have from my collection over the years. So when I see a color that looks right, I just grab it and use it. So again, I apologize if they're not available anymore. Moving on to basic skin tone now from Vallejo. Going ahead and hitting the highlight top down where the sun's going to catch the skin most prominently, I should say. And going ahead now, this is starting to build that interest into the skin, building those multiple layers of varying shades and hues and colors of the skin. It really puts that interest in. So we're just going to go ahead and hit all the skin pieces from the top down angle, where the sun would be hitting this model. The base of this model has this large vertical pillar that she's kind of leaning up against, and that I didn't incorporate with where the sun's really hitting, but the way that the model's hair and just her overall pose kind of really make that just not a moot point when we get further in the video and actually do the assembly. You just see that it really wasn't necessary to incorporate the pillar necessarily blocking any the way the light would be hitting the backside of her. And here I'm just going ahead and finishing up the last of the highlighted areas on her skin. For the most intense highlights on her skin, I'm using this light flush, also from Vallejo, and this is the areas of the model where the light would be hitting it most directly, and this is also should be the smallest areas on the skin that you can be doing the highlighting on. Really, there's just accentuating that, like the top curve of the shoulder, top of the breast, for example, where the rib cage would stick out and catch the top of the light, and then create the the shadows and the ripples and the interest of the different shades underneath. Again, you always got to keep in mind where your light source is coming from and making sure it's hitting the proper part of the model with your strongest highlights. I think I missed part of the recording where I did come back on the undershade where the red ink was, and I used the Orchis Dermis from scale 75 and kind of knocked down those really strong red highlights to make it more blend in with the skin. And as you do this, it might be like a go back and forth. If you put too many highlights in, you might need to back it back off again with one of the lower shades that you did previously, and you can just kind of go back and forth until you get that right blend. This step is one of the most crucial, in my opinion, after you finish your skin, is to spray a coat of varnish. I use this ultra matte varnish from AK, and this is like an undo button almost, or just a redo in case you're painting any areas and you accidentally get any paint on the skin. Having this varnish on there will make it very easy to wipe that paint off without staining the skin, or creating an issue where you're going to have to go back and try to touch up that skin. So super important to put varnish on after the skin's done. Okay, onto the base. I'd already glued these two pieces of the bottom part of the base together, and of course we had some gaps and cracks where the two pieces didn't fit perfectly. Here I'm using Milliput, and I used a little bit of iso alcohol here to soften the Milliput, and depending on how much alcohol you use, you could turn Milliput into a softer putty all the way down into literally a liquid you could paint with. It all depends on the thinness you really need for the project. So here I'm just smushing it into the cracks. This base has a lot of sculpted detail into it, which is why I chose Milliput over just filling it with resin. I think Milliput allows me to add those textures right back into it a lot easier than if I just poured liquid resin and used a UV light to cure it. And then I'm just going ahead and just kind of sculpting it back in. Now using a Space Wolves Gray contrast paint from Citadel. This is that vertical pillar I mentioned earlier. And coming from the bottom, going ahead and putting in these darker color on the bottom side of this. My goal here is to make this look like a weathered stone monolith or pillar statue, if you will. And again, just hitting all the areas from the bottom first with the Space Wolves Gray, including the bottom areas here of the bottom base as well. That's about the only areas on this that would be like in shadow. And then moving on to a Griff Charger Gray, which is just a lighter contrast gray, hitting it from the top side and really putting that stone color in. And here I'm not looking to get a 100% even coverage. I want it to be a little uneven to, again, just give an appearance of stone not having a nice perfectly even coloring, especially a stone that we want the appearance to be out in the wild and weathered over a number of years. And again, just starting on the bottom of the base here and from the top down. Now going on and using a light gray and doing just a dry brushing technique here. I don't remember which exact gray I use. It's just a light, cool light gray, not a warm gray. And hitting all the edges here to give it just a little bit more interest when you look at the base. I don't want the base to be the focal point by any means, but I also don't want it to look too uninteresting either. So it's just finding that balance of making it look nice without taking away from the actual model, which is, of course, the focal point of this piece. Just go ahead and dry brushing all the areas. Some areas I'll hit harder than others. And just hitting all the sharp edges and just going and kind of just using my eye as I go to see what I think looks looks like old weathered stone, and stopping when I think it's there. Okay, for the final touch on this base, I'm using this Army Painter Transparent Green, or Insta Paint. It's like a contrast paint. And I'm using this on all of the, is it moss, grass, lichen, whatever vegetation might grow on a abandoned ruin or stone monolith. That's what I'm using here as the base coat. And it's sculpted fairly well in the model where all the vegetation is, but I'm using more of a dabbing approach rather than brush strokes, and that helps blend in where the end of the sculpted vegetation and where the stone actually is. Sometimes it's not very well defined, so my approach here of kind of just blotting and dabbing seems to help blend it in. Make it look more natural than if I were to do like a clean brush stroke, for example. Going around identifying where all the vegetation is and putting this color on. One thing I did this time around with my videos is I made some adjustments to my lighting, and I think the lighting came out better than my previous videos, which I'm happy about. However, I also moved the camera, and we have a lot of footage I actually had to cut out because my big dumb head got in the way, and unfortunately I just had to cut footage out just because I was completely blocking the view of what I was doing. So that really comes in play more later on when we get into doing the portrait of the model and some of her hair. So here I'm using a bright pale green, and now I'm doing just a brush, dry brushing on this, and I'm doing it more aggressively on the top where the sun's coming directly down and hitting the vegetation, and doing it a little bit less on the sides and on the underside of where the vertical pillar would be. But again, just going around using this dry brush technique to give it more of a visual interest. And onto my favorite part of this model, which is her hair. Her hair is really intricate, has a lot of volumes to it, has a lot of details with braids and just general flows and that, which I found really interesting. I'm using a sanguine base, again a P3 paint for the kind of the dark base color of her hair. In the game, her hair is really interesting. It goes from this super light orange, almost not quite yellow, super bright orange, to this really darkish brown red color. So really, the hair really has this really large range of colors in it. So again, I'm starting with the sanguine base to give it that all the recesses and the deepest areas, this dark base to work up from. However, after this first step of getting this first color down, I'll actually be introducing some even darker shadow colors here in a moment. But right now I'm just being careful to go around framing out all of the areas where the hair would touch anywhere else. Like for example here, her arm, around her face, and her, I think that's just it, and her neck and her ears and that. And then I'm just going and using brushes for this entire bit of her hair. I was tempted to go ahead and do the airbrush, but I decided to do a model where I didn't have to do any masking. So, and I laugh a little bit because of the issues I have with various masking techniques in the past couple videos. So the hair has so many curves and recesses in that I wasn't worried about brush strokes at all. In fact, I thought even brush strokes would actually enhance the appearance of the hair with if you put the brush strokes on in the right direction, it actually enhances the appearance of the hair strands. I'm switching to a bigger brush now to just do a large coverage here, because it's just going to go over the entire amount of over our entire hair, both on the inside of the model and the outside. The inside towards the bottom will be covered up by her body. Now here I'm using this sanguine base and a dark, really a dark muddy blue color mixed together. And here I'm just putting this into the deepest recesses of her hair. And it's areas where from the top down the light would just absolutely not hit in those areas at all. And I'm being fairly I'm being liberal in the areas I'm putting it in, but I'm being very selective in those areas, if that makes sense. So definitely this would never go on anywhere on the top part, anything that's facing upwards on the hair. And I'm just putting it in there and letting it dry. Now I'm switching over to a burnt red, and this will be the first of the colors that I'm using to build up to that, eventually that reddish orange color that her hair is. One thing with reds in particular, reds and oranges, when you put them on like this and they're wet, it looks wrong. You have to fight your instincts and just kind of trust in what the paint's going to do. And then what the paint is end up going to do is going to dry much more of a transparent and much darker than when it's wet. Like I said, especially with these reds and oranges and that. So here I'm going over almost the entire amount of hair, especially more so on the areas that face upwards, and just going ahead and putting a thin coat on. And you can see already how it's even starting to dry on the top and how it's fading and darkening based on when it first comes off the brush. And the thing with hair also is it has different shapes to it. So like the top of her head has almost cylinders across the top of her head. When it's hanging down, it's got these cylinders, if you will, again. So keep that in mind, just how the shape of each section of hair is and how light would interact with the general shape of each section of hair, as well as, of course, the light direction. Now on the back of her hair, it kind of waves in towards her and back out of her, and the times it comes back out of her creates these bands, like these horizontal bands. And here I'm painting one here, catching that first kind of horizontal strip, if you will, and now I'm down below and hitting a second band. This is also important. So you have the horizontal bands where the hair kind of flows in and out away from the body and back in towards the body. And then also you got to remember what part of the band is sticking upwards or facing upwards rather to catch the light. Now I'm switching over to a Wild Rider red, which is, you can see, is more of an orange. Again, trust the paint, trust the process. It will not look like this when it's dry. It looks wrong. It looks too aggressive right now. But it will work. It will look better. Now here I'm just tightening up the areas where I want the highlights. So I would really kind of consider this my maybe first true highlight color. And I'm tightening up those areas, like the cylinders on the top of her head, for example, making it a smaller width than the previous colors were. And each color I'll add after this, you'll see it just gets narrower and narrower. And again, just being careful not to get any of this into the deepest recesses, because that's where our shadows are. We want to maintain the shadows. The shadows give us that contrast that we need to really make the hair pop, make these highlights pop. Just working down the model, those little braids there. Right now I'm not quite worried about the actual blending of each color yet. I'm really just doing kind of blocking out of where each of these areas of color are. We blocked out the original bands and in that. Now again, I'm not worried about doing the final blending yet between each of these colors within the bands, but I am tightening up how much of each color I put within the band. So here again, hitting that one of the horizontal bands I talked about, making sure I'm just not quite going as wide as I did with the previous color. And also within each band, every brush stroke, I try not to make it exactly the same length as all the others, to give it more of a variance in length, just to make it more interesting. You can see again, even on the top of her head to the bottom already as it's drying, you can see already how it's just that initial punch of the wet paint is faded and is looking a little more normal, a little less wrong, if you will. But you need a contrast for the hair to really pop, and that's what it's looking like at this point. Here I'm going back with the same color again, and this is my first revision of where I'm doing actual more blending. I'm looking at where the areas are that it was kind of like a stark transition between the previous color and the color I'm putting on, and just doing that first kind of, I guess, blending you would call, just to make it look more natural, how it flows between the darker fire red and this red here I'm putting on, or the burnt red to this red. And again, just going around and doing those touch-ups, and this is really thin right now. It's pretty darn thin paint. You want to go slowly in thin layers rather than try to do it all in one coat. One coat won't work. And here we're going to this Troll Slayer orange, I believe it was. And again, just like the previous color, doing the same technique again, but tightening up how wide. I'm making it narrower and narrower across the top of that first cylinder, if you will, or each cylinder on top of her head that makes up the shape of her hair. Again, it looks bright, looks too aggressive, but as it dries, as I said, it'll blend in. And here I'm really looking at every little shape now. I'm looking at each braid. Each little section of hair is its own little mini shape, and then putting the highlights in as appropriate, making sure not to hit any of the recessed darker colors, and just highlight after highlight here. Here I'm also working to make sure that it's blending in properly, and again, by doing thin coats, watering, keeping your paint thin, and just going with multiple thin coats if needed. Also, the intensity of the colors are going to be more intense as they face upwards and less intense as they face like sideways. So like in this area I'm doing right there, it's more facing upwards, so that would be an area that I might concentrate a couple coats on versus maybe just one or two. And again, now I'm in that horizontal bands, within the horizontal bands, tightening it up and keeping the range of the brush strokes smaller, and still varying the width of them within each stroke there within the band, but tightening up the overall length of each one, just to really tighten up where the highlights are. And then again on towards the bottom there of the curls of her hair, focusing on where it's up, facing upwards, and not putting any of this color on the bottom side. This piece that drapes over her arm here, it's flat. I mean, it's got coarse hair details in it, but it's really flat, so it's just a wider area, but it's still the same principles apply. And here I'm using a lighter color again, going over and just doing what I just said before. We're just going and tightening up the bands even more, and giving it even a more of a highlight. So if you kind of like just take a step back and look at the colors now, you can see that we're almost getting to that really bright orange, almost yellow color that her hair is in the video game. This isn't quite the highest highlight we'll have yet. It'll get one more punch here in a moment. But again, now I'm very tight with the highlights here. It's just super short brush strokes, just putting the tiniest bit right on the top part of each of those little shapes, just where the light would catch it most. Each of these braids here, it's like literally each little braid's like its own little curve, if you will. So our own little cylinder or sphere, and just hitting the most top curvy part of each one to really make that hair pop out. And then just working down each of those horizontal bands again. Short strokes. Again, important to keep every brush stroke not exactly the same length within those bands to give it more of an interest. If you ever look at photos of hair, real hair, you'll see these bands, or halos as some people call them, and you'll see that just how it's not exactly the same length across the entire band. It has variance to it depending on the light source, the direction of the light, the hair, etc. And again, just working down here to get these last the bottom parts of these bottom bands of the back of her hair, get these highlights in. And again, this is that area that it's wider, so it's going to have just bigger highlights overall, but it's the same principle applies. You're still tightening up how much you're putting in versus how much you did on the last one. Here I'm using a warm flesh and that fire dragon paint, and I'm using a mixture here. And this is the last highlight that'll go on her. In here, it's really more of the warm flesh with just a little bit of that orange mixed in. And I'm putting in and I'm establishing where I want those final highlights to be. This is the where I want them to be, the shape, the length, etc. But it's, again, it looks stark, and it is in this case. So after I get all these final highlights positioned and established, I'll go back one more time with a very, very, very watered down version of that orange that we used in this mixture without the warm flesh, and it'll be like a glaze consistency. So it's almost pure water with just a tint of that orange in it. And I'll go over all these marks that I'm putting in now with one final glaze. And what that does is it really blends in the transitions between this final stark highlight to the color underneath. It really gives it a nice smooth transition. But first, the idea here is to make sure you have your final highlights in place where you want them first, and then go back and do that final glaze over to really solidify and do a kind of a really nice final blend. Here I'm just again hitting each little dot of her smallest braids here, just to really accentuate them and really call them out as the details that they have. And again, less is more. When you get to this point, you want to stay true to where your bands are and where the highlights are, but you definitely don't want to overdo this step. This is really what gives it that final kind of punch, if you will, that really sells the hair and the variance of the color and the highlights and the. Now moving on to some of the details in the model, I'm using a Instapaint quick contrast paint blue, and we're hitting the blue wraps that are underneath the brown straps on various parts of her on the model. Here it's her one arm, and this blue is just going to serve as really more of the shadow color. Hit all those deep recesses in the folds of the cloth that are, like I said, that are strapped underneath the armor, and the brown leather strappings that go over top parts of the model. It's kind of a standard approach to hit it up with the contrast first, and then, or in this case, a quick paint, Army Paint or Quick Paint or Instapaint or Speed Paint. Holy cow, everyone has a different name. But the idea is the same. Use this paint to really get into the shadows, almost like a wash, if you will. But I'm using this first, and then going to be going over it here shortly with a lighter blue to give it its final actual blue color that the wraps have. This model has a lot of vibrant colors, blues and reds, and that I really want to try to capture. Continuing on to her torso and hitting the lower fringe around her waist, as well as the cloth that's wrapped around her left arm. Same idea, just going ahead and first putting this speed paint in, catching the recesses, the deeper areas of the sculpt, getting that color in first. Now I'm switching over to a contrast of it's a lighter blue turquoisey color. The color of her bandana here is more like a teal color. So this is the darker, like a darker teal, going to again act as the shadow color. Same principle as just what we did on the blue parts. Here I'm just careful not to hold the model in the wrong way. And now I'm using an arcane blue, again another P3 paint, and here I'm hitting all the raised areas of this bandana. This bandana has a lot of really deep recesses, which is where are the only areas that I really want to have that contrast paint still left after I put this the actual color of the majority of the bandana on. So you can see it's turning into this teal blue color. and just careful not to get into the deepest recesses of the sculpt, and just have a nice smooth transition between the highlighted areas of this arcane blue and the leaving not a lot, but leaving that contrast color in the recesses. Okay, using a leather brown from Vallejo. I really like this color quite a bit. And going ahead and going back to the arm and painting in those straps, leather straps that kind of attach the armor plating on top of the under blue cloth wrap. And just being careful, getting the brown in. Now switching over to that, I forget which blue this is. I think it's this magic blue. Not 100% sure what it was, but it's a lighter blue. And this is the color that is going to be the highlight color for the blue. And again, just going ahead, same thing with like I did with the bandana, hitting all the highlighted raised parts of the model, and working around and getting that fringe area as well. Didn't like that, so switched over to a shade. It was too flat after I put that highlighted blue on. I really covered up too much of the original contrast, so I'm actually just going back and doing more of a traditional approach with this Drakenhoof Nightshade wash to catch those recesses again. And I switched over, I believe this is a Fenrisian gray, and I'm painting the armor plates on her body. And in the game, these armor plates are almost like a stark white, and I tried various different shades of cooler grays and settled on this one. This one's got a little more of a bluish tint to it, which I thought complemented the other blue on her model. And just going around, being careful not to, of course, hit the skin or hit those grooves that are in the armor plating as well, trying to leave those open to expose the skin underneath. Moving on, using that brown leather brown from Vallejo again, and getting her belt. Now this belt will eventually have some red on each side of it, so just hit the belt part. And going to use the shoulder straps as well. One of them doesn't come, it kind of just blends into her back because the hair covers it up later. I'm using this speed metal, and I'm using a kind of a really light dry brush technique, and this is putting those metal scratches into the armor plating. So this really sells the fact that it's not just like a painted piece of metal, it's also got a lot of wear and tear on it, and hitting all the raised areas, the folds there, and really giving that appearance that it's a well-worn metal on her. Switching over to the red, and this is a little sash that hangs down from the belt that will be put on. And again, same idea as the blue. I really wanted to get more of a kind of a contrast in texture on the belt and the shoulder straps. I'm using an Agrex Earthshade to capture the texture details that are in the belt, so it's not so flat looking. And now getting this red cloth that's underneath the belt. It hangs out, or it's exposed on both the top and bottom sides of the belt, and that's what that red sash that I just had airbrushed previously, it's part of that as well. So again, just being careful, going slow with the brush. This is sped up quite a bit, so my actual painting speed is much slower than what's on the video. But being careful, nice slow strokes. And then I'm painting that Fenrisian gray here again on those straps that hold the belt. These are also metal, and just again being careful, slow brush strokes. Moving on to her spear now, starting again with that speed metal with the airbrush, hitting the blade and all the mechanical parts. So the spear is made up of wood and feathers and high-tech mechanical parts and rope and a little bit of that blue cloth, and of course her hand is holding it. Using some Rhinox hide for the wood. And like in kind of the core of the spear, it's just like these wood bundles of wood sticks or a wood log and whatnot. So using Rhinox hide to establish the brown color of the wood. And I really went dark here because I wanted it to not blend in with the brown leather that the ropes will be here in a moment. Using that magic blue to go ahead and put the blue on the cloth that's underneath, same as like her her wrist that we had done earlier, or her arm that we done earlier. Using a black wash here to, again, just kind of darken that wood of the spear, and again pull out some of the details of the recesses within the wood. Like I said, it's like bundles of twigs or branches that make it up, so it really pops each of those branches out. Using that Phaneresian gray to get these armor plates. So there's armor plating that's kind of wrapped around portions of the tech, if you will. Using a brown leather to get the ropes that are lashed around that hold everything together. And then of course panel line to really hit those details, recessed details on the silver areas, the more of the high-techy parts of the weapon, the blade, that blocky thing at the base of the spear, and then using that nice, that same red we used earlier to hit the feathers. It was multiple coats of the red to get those feathers to really pop. And then switching using a transparent yellow from Pro Acryl, and this is go over some of the little details again of the high-tech parts of the spear. I like using a transparent yellow because it shows all the metallic through it, the weathering, the panel lines that it used. All that shines through the yellow. Onto everyone's favorite part, the portrait, starting with a little earpiece called the focus. That's big part of the game for her. And now onto the eyebrows, starting with the darker color and moving up into the lighter colors, using the same colors that you use for the hair. Want to start dark, get the shapes established, and then use light brush strokes to get the hairs at the right strokes to get hair strands in her eyebrows with a lighter color. I messed around with the camera angles in this part of the video, and a lot of my head was actually unfortunately in the way, so there would be little time skips here. So there, I put the black into the eyes and to get to the eyelashes in that first, before going ahead and putting an off-white, I think a deck tan, into her eyes to establish the actual whites of her eyes there. And then moving from there into, I use this yellow green and this bright yellow green from Pro Acryl to establish her actual iris. And I have her looking off to the side. First put the darker color in, the darker green, and then the lighter green in a smaller area, and then finally black for the pupils. Moving on to the last part, assembly. I'm using this E6000 glue. I've used it in every video, and I love this glue because it is super strong, but it does take forever to dry. So depending on the part you're putting in, sometimes I'll also use super glue as more of a temporary holder while the E6000 dries. It could take 24, 48 hours for it to fully dry. Which in this case is fine. The model just stacks from the bottom up, and I don't really have to worry so much about any parts really falling off while it has a chance to dry. So I'll just assemble it, put it off to the side, wait a day or two, and then handle it to put it wherever I obviously want to put it. Here I'm putting the glue in for her legs, and already put the vertical base on. Again, it's super simple. It's just ground up. Here I'm actually doing a little sub-assembly of her torso and her head first before I put it on her lower body. And again, just making sure I get a lot of that, the E6000 in. Don't want to overdo it and have it ooze out over the edges, of course. So most of it is settled down into the key and the hole for the key. And just building her up from ground up, and just making sure each piece is fully seated. And here I'm just checking how she's leaning up against that pillar. There's a tiny gap between the back of her hair and her arm in the pillar, but not very much. And again, put her arm on, and we're gonna just go ahead and put that glue on her hand for the spear. This would be an area that I might have had to use super glue but it was such a tight fit that there was no chance it was going to fall out again. And then the last piece here is that little sash that hangs off of her right there underneath her hip, or right against her hip there. It just slots in. And that's the last piece. My camera angle here cut off the top of the pillar. There we go. Got a little bit better. And there it is. With that, this model is ready to be put on display. If you made it to this part of the video, I want to thank you for sticking through it to the end. I really enjoyed doing this model, and I really wanted to focus quite a bit on her hair and how I accomplished the tones and the highlightings of the hair. That was for me, the most interesting and enjoyable part of the painting this particular model. Again, thank you so much for all your support and checking out my video, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.